When do you feel like that spark first got lit for you? That creative spark?
I think when I was like 12, 13, I've always loved to draw. I always loved to paint. And when I was like 12, 13, my parents got me, it was a toy. It was called the Mr. Hugo doll. This weird little, it was a little hand puppet, but it came with mustaches and noses and wax and blood and a wig. And you could put the mustaches and stuff on the puppet, but it was also big enough, the head, so it could fit on a 12-year-old boy's face. So I could put cuts on my face and blood and scars and mustaches. So I used to do that, play with that. Was one of my favorite toys forever. And I think that's what got me into the makeup world. And then I always used to love being somebody else, and I couldn't be on stage because I have horrible stage fright.
Oh, really?
So I'm not really a good on stage person, but I always wanted to be do part of this, and I just started doing makeup when I was like 17, 18 years old, and just fell in love with it. I think I started doing like a community theater group in my neighborhood. St. Andrew's Theater had a St. Andrew's Church had a community theater group, and we did Annie. And I got to do the bald cap on Daddy Warbucks every day. And actually, the guy that was playing Daddy Warbucks is a big cartoon, DC comic artist, George Perez.
Oh, wow.
So I would make George Perez bald every day to play Daddy Warbucks in the community theater. And that was my start. My first real gig doing makeup was doing that community theater gig. I kind of just taught myself.
Really?
At the time, there were no schools. There was no place really to go to learn. So I bought everything I would buy. I would buy every book I could get. I would read every magazine that had Dick Smith's makeup handbook, devoured it. There was Vincent Kehoe's makeup book. I read it like cover to cover dozens of times. Belasco's makeup book, cover to cover dozens of times. I would just read it. And I would look at magazine articles and interviews in magazines. And my biggest thing was when I saw a picture of somebody in front of a makeup counter at their station, I would sit there with a magnifying glass trying to see what was on the counter to see what they were using.
Oh, wow.
Because now you do this and you can zoom in. Back then, I was like, I would want to see what they were using on their count, what they were using, so I would try and figure it out.
So you were like a detective trying to figure out this process.
Yeah, and then I remember there's a store here in New York called Alcone, and it's a makeup supply place. They have a warehouse in Long Island City, so it was the 7 train took you right to Alcone. So I used to go there. I think I was like 16 years old, 17 years old, and I would walk in there with my Dick Smith book and go, I want liquid latex, grease paint, and derma wax, and I would get all this stuff. And now they've known me there since I was a kid, and now they're like, oh my, now he runs Saturday Night Live, but they still remember me as that little kid going in there.
Now, did you experiment on yourself, on your friends, on your family?
I used to torture myself a lot. Very few of my friends, a couple of my friends would let me torture them, but I would sit in my room, and I have a lot of photos of me with makeups on my face. I would do most all of my makeups on myself growing up.
Wow.
I would torture myself, but it was, and I still like to know what I'm doing to somebody before I glue it on them. So I would rather glue something on me or glue something on one of my assistants or somebody, so we know what it's like. Now more I do it on somebody else, but but every so often I'll glue it to me just so I know what I'm doing to somebody, because it really, sometimes it can be intrusive,